your healing journey. If you're anything like me, you wish that someone could just rescue you from your journey, that they would tell you just exactly what to do, and when you did that, you would feel better. Pain is part of our journey, whether it is the pain of grief, the pain of trauma, the complexity of our internal dialogue, our spiritual conflict, our anxiety. We are all on a journey, and I encourage you to embrace that journey. Why should you start and why should you embrace that journey? It makes for a happier, more purposeful life. My name's Cristi Bundakumara. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but I have been through unimaginable pain. I have lost 3 children, one in a drowning accident, one after 10 years of medical trauma, and one from unexpected death and epilepsy. And then I recently lost my husband to the same neurodegenerative condition. I have trauma and grief weighted on my shoulders, but I am learning to process that, and I can teach you to process that. If you're interested in more information about how I guide people through their grief and trauma, click the link below. But today we are going to talk about what do you need to do to start your journey of healing. Maybe you've already started your journey of healing. Maybe you have read some self-help books, acknowledging the pain that you have experienced in your life. Maybe you have seen a professional counselor. Good job. Don't stop. Your journey is for life. It is not we do one thing, we work through that goal, and then the pain is gone. It is over. The reality is many of the things that we have experienced, the pain that we have experienced, continues to impact our life. But if we have knowledge of that, we can have it impact in positive ways. We can change the narrative. We can take our story of pain and shift it to purpose. That's what I've done, and I want to encourage you in your healing journey to do that. I'm going to talk about 3 things in this video on how to get started on that healing journey and to constantly be doing these things. The first thing is to acknowledge that pain is part of the process. None of us escapes the reality of pain in this world. And you might be saying, well, yeah, but my pain is worse. Can you imagine? I understand that with all the loss that I've experienced. But I could also talk to someone who maybe has just lost one person or had one traumatic event in their life. It's their pain. This is your pain. And you should acknowledge that and process that. We use the word process all the time in self-development and mental health, but do we actually teach you how to do that? Well, it goes back to pain. You must feel the pain of what you're going through without beating yourself up about it, right? And this I talk a lot about separating, because what happens in pain, whether it's grief or it's trauma, the internal narrative that you are telling yourself, if it is negative, that is impacting your ability to process. So the first thing is acknowledging that pain and learning to process that. And I have tons of other videos. I have courses that actually teach you the nitty-gritty of how to do that. But I want you to just think about that for a second. Get out a pen and paper and start writing down your pain. What is your pain? What do you feel like you need to process and let go of? Maybe there's things that are rightfully yours and you're not going to let go of them, like losing my children. I will not let go of the pain of losing my children, but I will let go of the trauma of it. And I talk about that a lot when I'm talking about how do you actually process traumatic grief. So it's a learning process, and it's not all going to be explained in this video, but I just want you to acknowledge that there is pain and we have to learn to process it, because it will be cumulative if we don't learn to process it, right? The pain from your childhood, the the different pain in your life just keeps building. And we all have a breaking point or a give up point or a physical manifestation point. When I say physical manifestation, like it comes out in other ways, either mental health diagnoses like depression and anxiety, or in physical symptoms like migraines and headaches and autoimmune. So we're going to acknowledge that this healing journey will include pain. The second thing I want you to start thinking about is, how do I build a supportive environment? We all need one or two people in our lives that we can talk to, and it could be a professional therapist, but it should not only be a professional therapist. You should have a best friend, a partner, your mother, a family member. It's going to be different for each of you. For me, it is my sister. My sister is my best friend, and I can tell her anything, and she has seen the worst of me. And if you've seen my documentary, you can see how she didn't know what to say or do. So you're not looking for the person that has the answers. You're looking for the person who's willing to show up for you, and an environment where you feel safe physically, mentally. And oftentimes, I talk about we can't heal from trauma until we're out of the trauma. And my life story was, my son was diagnosed with a rare neurodegenerative condition, 10 years of medical trauma before he passed away. But even when he passed away, the trauma was not over, because my daughter and my husband also had the same diagnosis. And just now, as I am going through the grief of losing all of them, I am safe from the trauma. Like it is over. So if you are in the midst of this, and this is a lot of my special needs moms, or you have a loved one who is in the midst of fighting a horrible disorder or possibly terminal condition, you may not be able to build the perfect environment for healing at this time. But I want you to recognize parts of your life that can be that healing environment. I was talking to a friend of mine who has a child with catastrophic epilepsy. And she's like, I can't get out of fight or flight. And I'm like, but you shouldn't. You are still fighting for your son. You can't just say, I'm not going to fight anymore, right? But it does take a toll on our body. And we can start the healing journey, and we can find environments of safety, and we can try to cool our fight or flight in the midst of the peace between the storms. But you also have to give yourself grace and compassion. If you are dealing with a chronic stress, you may not be able to change your environment. And that's just the reality. But that doesn't mean you can't start your journey. So 1, you are going to acknowledge that your journey is about feeling the pain. You're going to build a supportive environment. Even if you're in a chronic stress situation, you are going to find pockets of your life, places in your life that can be peace. Maybe it's a room in your house. Maybe it's a closet. Maybe that's all you have. Maybe it's 10 minutes of meditation a day and that's all you have. But find that environment. Okay, so we're accepting pain as part of the process. We're building an environment, and then we are finding techniques that work. I often have people come to me and say, oh, I've tried everything. My last therapist told me to do breathing techniques and that doesn't work. I tried meditation and that doesn't work. Okay, you tried 2 things and that didn't work. Keep exploring techniques. I teach the foundation is the mentally strong method, because oftentimes what I have found in my self-development journey is I will read a book about meditation, or I'll read a book about positive self-talk, and I'll be like, that's great, but that didn't do anything for my trauma. That didn't do anything for my grief. What do I do about the chaos? And the mentally strong method is about learning to think through those things. But what makes it different than every other technique is the organizational piece. Because positive self-talk helps your negative self-talk, but it doesn't help your grief and trauma. It helps the impact that the trauma may have had on your negative self-talk, right? And we replace that with positive self-talk. But it doesn't actually help us release the trauma. So when I talk about the mentally strong method, it is about creating this foundation of being able to think through your problems, organize them so that you can make choices in line with what you want. So let's take that special needs mom, for example. I was one, and I remember in the midst of the 10 years of medical trauma with my son, Reggie, I didn't have time to stop. I didn't feel like techniques were working. I was on a mission to save his life. I was afraid. I had fear often. There was spiritual conflict. There was a lot of negative self-talk. And in the midst of that 10 years of Reggie's medical trauma is when I developed the Mentally Strong Method, because I knew I had to organize these things. I knew that the negative self-talk wasn't helping me, but I also knew the positive self-talk wasn't helping my fear. And so I learned so many things, and I was able to take that chaos and put it into categories. And now I know, after losing Reggie and losing Maya, that grief is to be cherished. The pain of my grief is mine. But I am continuing to find techniques to release the trauma. I do brain spotting. I do somatic release, different types of energy work, including yoga. These are techniques that are for releasing trauma that is stored in the body. I am constantly working on thinking positive and believing in those thoughts. I am constantly looking at my anxiety and trying to get it at a mild level, which makes me productive. I work through my spiritual conflict as it comes up, and I work through all of those things differently. So the 3 things that you're going to remember from this video is, in your journey, pain is real. You have to acknowledge it and learn to process it. That is part of your healing journey. You're going to create a supportive environment. Even if you can't make it 100% supportive, you've got to find the people in the safe spaces. And then lastly, you are going to continue to try technique after technique until you find what works for you. It is your healing journey. I can guide you, and I do that for hundreds of people. I guide them using the Mentally Strong Method as the foundation. But then what they do with those things is very custom and very unique and very personal. What worked for me may not work for you. What worked for me may actually be too much for you. So it's not about having all of the answers. It's about not giving up, taking responsibility for your journey, your healing journey. And when you go to a professional, whether it's a psychiatrist to start medication, a counselor to work through some of those things, maybe an alternative practitioner, maybe reading a book, all of that stuff is just information for you to figure out your custom plan. What works for you? I remember as I was in my 20s and 30s and been on a self-development journey throughout that whole time, I kept looking for someone else's answers to 100% work for me. And that's not a reality. Everything that you learn on this journey, you take on, and what works for you, you keep. What doesn't work for you, you adjust. You do not beat yourself up because it doesn't work for you. And I did a lot of that. I would read a book and it would say, do the A, B, and C, and then everything would work out. And I would do it to the book, and it wouldn't work out. And now I've learned to give myself grace and compassion, and I am unique, and my story is different, just like your story is your story. What works for you? You have to figure that out. I can give you guidance, whatever program or book or technique that you do can be a part of that journey, but the end journey, what works for you, is yours and is unique. And it is for a lifetime. When you learn what works for you, anything could happen to you and you, I can handle it. That's resilience. When you are on a healing journey and you are figuring it out, you are building resilience. Resilience is not just something that you are born with. It is through going through this healing journey and knowing that regardless of what happens in your life, you can figure it out. You are mentally strong.